Welcome back to the Builder's Bench, where politics meets construction. I'm Craig Larkins, and we are now in week 2 of the federal election campaign. Today, we are talking about the highlights, promises, and headlines from the campaign trail, and we are looking ahead to week 2. To help us break it all down, we've got an incredible panel today. Joining us from Ottawa is Louis-Philippe Champagne, Associate VP, Public Affairs and Industry Practices for the Canadian Construction Association. From Victoria, Chris Atchison, the president of the BC Construction Association. And joining us from Calgary today is Bill Black, president and CEO of the Calgary Construction Association. Thank you all for joining us today.
Nice to see you again.
Good to be here.
Before we dive in, LP, you know I like to dive into the polls first. Let's dive in and a quick update on the latest polls for us.
Thank you, Craig. No, it's always a good place to start. Interesting week, interesting times on the numbers. If you look back just in the last 7 days since our last episode, numbers have been shifting quite a bit in the same trend and direction that we were expecting, but a significant message comes out of this. So I'll say a few things. At the time of recording this episode, Liberals are nationally in aggregated poll around 42% support, 37.5% for Conservatives. There's a lot to say about this. First, I'll say polling is an imperfect science. Okay, there's a number of reasons why these numbers don't necessarily reflect what the result of the election would be. One, whenever you run poll as a pollster, there will be some margin of error because they don't canvass everyone. It's not a census. It's a subset of the population. So there's some distortion there. But fundamentally, there's two big problems. Seat projection is a very imperfect science. So you can try to correlate the overall support to what seat they're going to win. But at the end of the day, in Canada, what forms a government is the number of seats you win, number of MPs in the House, not how popular the prime minister is. So getting that conversion from percentage to seat, especially province to province, can be quite challenging. Right now, the most audacious tracker indicate that Liberal could be as high as 197 seats. This is a massive majority if that would be to be true. But again, imperfect science. Moreover, we still have a full month of election to go. So there's two things that can happen. First, maybe the Liberals are spiking too early and the next 4 weeks will be a slow decline. That has happened in the past. It's very difficult to look at these numbers and say, this is going to be the result a month from now on April 20th. The second thing, though, is what we call vote crystallization. At some point, 14 to 20 days before the end of the election, vote just crystallize. Canadians have made their mind. They've listened to party. They've heard maybe the first debate, and they just decide, okay, I'm going to vote Liberal. I can just tune out what's happening. I don't want to pay attention to the election anymore. At that point, it's very difficult for campaign to shift these voters around. So the big question right now when we look at number is, will Mark Carney be able to sustain that presume advance that he has in the poll, or will he decline for the next 4 weeks? And when will that vote crystallization will take place? And just how much can be converted to Conservative for Pierre Poilievre before that happens? This is the big unknown. A lot of cool regional data to look at. The one I want to point out, I'm glad Chris is here from BCCA. The BC war is waging on for the parties. Last week when we spoke, Conservative were still ahead in BC. The Liberal brand has been very damaged in British Columbia, especially at the provincial level. So that doesn't leave significant, organizer on the ground, financing capacity. Yet the Liberal campaign has took the lead now in BC specifically, mostly because of a challenging time for the NDP there. So interesting message we get out of BC. Across the rest of Canada, not significant changes, as you can imagine. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, mostly Conservative still. Ontario remained pretty strong for Liberal, and Atlantic, still that same wave that we saw last week.
Thanks, LB. So Chrissy teed you up there. Thoughts on the polling numbers?
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable what we're seeing in British Columbia. And I think for, just a reminder for the listener that BC has always played a unique and diverse role in Canada's federal elections. And historically, our province has always sent representatives from all 4 major parties to Ottawa, reflecting this kind of regional and ideological complexity of British Columbia. So, what we're seeing right now is just generally by region. In the Lower Mainland, it will usually lean Liberal with strong pockets of NDP and Conservative support. On Vancouver Island, historically or traditionally, there's been strong support for the NDP and Green parties. Will this continue, especially in a political climate that seems to be directing Canadians toward 2 parties for this particular election? And in the interior and north, of British Columbia, where it's predominantly been conservative, almost exclusively conservative territory with some NDP support. And is the support that may be in peril this time. I think where British Columbians maybe have felt like they had the luxury to cast votes for parties that would be not necessarily in opposition, but maybe forming a coalition that would prop up a minority government. I think that attitudes in British Columbia for this particular election seem to be changing. So as we head into this week of the campaign, those what have been historical spheres of influence are somewhat wavering, right? Like we're seeing a little bit of this resurgence of the Liberal brand that LP alluded to, whereas if you could go back a month before Carney was voted as the leader of the Liberal Party and then becoming the Prime Minister, you just go back a number of months, it was a wasteland for Liberals in British Columbia. There was no chance. Now all of a sudden there's this remarkable resurgence, and it's shaking up this what would be kind of a trajectory that was expected in British Columbia. So I would say the BCCA is poised once again to be an intriguing election study, and the political foundation that is unsettled right now is going to continue to be unsettled as the campaigns begin to ramp up. And only when we get to that crystallization phase that LP alludes to is there going to be more clarity in British Columbia. There's a lot up for grabs in BC.
Thank you, Chris. Now, Bill, in Alberta, the Conservatives are sitting at 54%, Liberals at 28%, and there are 37 seats up for grabs there. What's your take on the polling numbers federally and within the province?
Well, I mean, I think Alberta has a very consistent attitude towards Ottawa. Over the last 9 or 10 years, that has become more entrenched, and it's seen as a bit of a vendetta against Alberta by a large portion of Albertans and a large portion of our industry. So, you know, I think these polling numbers ring true to the sentiments and the hopes and the aspirations. But I think what the industry, like everybody, is currently faced with what they thought might be a bit of a slam dunk is no longer heading that way. And now they're possibly more spending time trying to divorce their preference from the reality. I got into a couple of heated arguments I even got accused as a liberal over the weekend because I was pointing to where the facts are taking us, regardless of your emotions and your sentiments. And I said, you know, don't assume that what you want is going to happen, and get out there and get informed. And that's one of the reasons we've got LP coming to Calgary on Friday morning. We got a couple of hundred industry folks that are very eager to hear construction perspective on the federal election. The other sentiment you hear a lot of in Alberta is, well, you know, the minds are made up by the time the voting finishes in Ontario. So there's always that proportional representation bitterness, understandably, to be honest. But then we've got a whole new demographic eligible to vote in this federal election who weren't last time, who are younger, with different attitudes towards certain things. And we've seen a huge influx of Ontarians into the Alberta marketplace. And Calgary alone, 175,000 new Calgarians in 2 years. A large portion of them are interprovincial. So I think there's a lot of change buried in all these dynamics that we're going to see play out in a manner that might surprise a few boomers.
That's for sure. If I can piggyback on one point that Bill just brought up, which is the reality of the demographic, right? Voters of different tranches of age really don't think the same way. And that's been the case for decades, really. If you look at the orange wave of the 2000, that was very much the youth movement that pushed the NDP in official opposition. If you look at 2015, the reason why Trudeau came from the third party to government was thanks to the youth vote. This time around, not so much the left that is behind, bringing capacity from the youth, but we really see a resurgence of youth support amongst the right? And it's not just a Canadian movement. We've seen it in the US with MAGA. We've seen it in Europe, more recently in Germany, that young white male really brings a lot of votes now. And this has been very solidly behind Pierre Poilievre. If you look at all the age, segment all the way to the 60s plus are mostly supporting Conservative, and it's really that older generation that brings that vote for the Liberal, which leads to the big question. At the end of the day, polling can say whatever they want. They can project the overall sentiment of the population, but who gets out and vote is really what matter at the end of the week on April 28th. So that's why I'm sure the Liberal right now are trying to capitalize on their number and making sure they get out these older men and women to get advance polling and vote by mail and all of these options to be sure that they secure their vote now rather than later. But if on election day, most Liberal supporters think that it's a shoo-in for Mark Carney, there's no risk of losing, and then that younger group of potentially Conservative supporter feel empowered by that they need to get out, that it's the future of their country that's at play, then that can drastically shift the results in the ballot box.
Thanks, LB. Yeah, I'm very curious to see voter turnout, both in the advanced polls and the day of on April 28th. So we've seen a flurry of announcements over the past week, even before the election was called, from housing. We have focused on the economy, trade infrastructure, and construction-related announcements like the Conservative more boots, less suits promise that was made a couple weeks ago. LP, can you walk us through your take on all the flurry of announcements?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. Just as we record this episode, we learned a few hours ago that the Carney campaign, the Liberal campaign, has announced their new housing strategy, not that different from the actual Liberal housing strategy released last year, but with some added language, especially around development charges, which is quite interesting because we still believe in the construction sector that one of the biggest challenge for building more homes, as we're all trying to do, is making sure that municipality has the housing enabling infrastructure they need. That is the sewer, the water main, the local park, the local elementary school and medical clinic. And the biggest challenge for this is, of course, making sure funding exists for the municipalities, for the provinces, in order to pay for all that essential housing and building infrastructure. Without that, you won't create new neighborhood. You will not be able to increase the population of your current neighborhood with bigger construction. So it brings the question, how do you pay for this? If we are reducing development charges, which at the end of the day will reduce the price of home, where does municipality get the money? How do we reform that framework? But that's the announcement that we've learned this morning. By far not the only one. Last week, Carney campaign again with a significant announcement on trade infrastructure, which is something CC has been championing for a few years with the CTIP campaign. And on the blue side, of course, very engaged party with the Conservative announcement on the shovel-ready project at the very beginning of the campaign, now energy corridor. So if there's one thing I can say really is how excited I am as a construction advocate to look at both large party just hammering announcement day in, day out on building Canada, right? On infrastructure project, on new project, on reducing red tape and tax burden so we can finally build. That's really the message we've been trying to convey to all parties, and it seems to be resonating now.
Thanks, LP. I'll tee you up, Chris, with this question because, we've worked closely with local government and the housing mandates that were pushed through last fall. We talk about building, but do we have enough boots on the ground to build?
Yeah, I think that's where these the commitments made by both the two major parties have really resonated with the construction industry in week one. Poilievre's more boots, fewer suits. You got to love the tagline there too, with things like the apprenticeship grants, the EI reform to support trades training, the increased or enhanced national mobility for skilled workers, tax deductions for travel to job sites. This is big for British Columbia too, and it's a workforce first approach that speaks directly to the skilled labor shortage that we're facing in British Columbia. And I know we're not alone in that, but it's speaking to the industry here in British Columbia. So this plan aligns well with a lot of the industry needs that we've been seeing and advocating for, especially I will say in the west and in the interior and north of our province, where trades are often forced to travel long distance in between job sites. Like there are a lot of carrots within this plan that speak to the grassroots of the construction sector. And I think it's a thoughtful approach, and one that's going to resonate for many workers on job sites and the construction industry at large. And as LP said, with Prime Minister Carney's announcements around infrastructure, housing, and really it's branded construction as a partner for their potential government, which is we've got to be pleased by both parties' announcements that involve the industry so specifically. In week one, the Trade Diversification Corridor Fund speaks volumes to what we've been asking for years. And it speaks as a direct response to the uncertainty that we're facing in light of the tariff crisis that we're undergoing right now. An aggressive homes strategy, 4 million new homes over the next 10 years, and streamlined permitting. I mean, when does that not speak to a builder, right? We need to see that. And that's something that we've seen at the provincial level as well. We've leaned into those promises that the provincial government is making. We'll say, hey, whatever you need to make this better, we're going to be there as a partner in this effort. And it's not as easy done as it is said. So I think, to sum up, the Conservative platform as it pertains to construction is strong. And I think that the Liberals have followed suit. And I think Carney has positioned himself as the adult in the room in his campaign, as attracted in British Columbia some star candidates for British Columbia, like Gregor Robinson, Ian Hannah-Mansing, and both parties, I would say, they have infrastructure and housing plans that align with BC priorities. So I think we need to continue to position our industry as a strategic partner, and hold the feet to the fire to make them continue to roll out policies and platform promises that speak to the construction industry in the coming weeks.
Thanks, Chris. Bill, what's anything that stood out in the past week up until now as far as announcements, policies, platforms?
Nothing that hasn't already been mentioned. I do think that, with some of the distraction that's been going on, we've had some concerns about some changes that the Fed's made that have been done quite quietly, but have the potential to have really negative impacts. So I'd like to hear them talk about what they're going to undo as well as to what they're going to bring in that's new. We saw the overnight disappearance of the Alberta Job Grant, which was part of the LMTA funding that ran its course. The federal government just allowed that to expire, and the Alberta Job Grant paid for 60% of training and development of your staff. And this is one of the things that frustrates certainly myself and others, is they always talk about apprentices and folks on the tools, but construction has a significant support structure of roles that are fundamental to be able to be an estimator, to pursue work, project coordinators and project managers, site supervisors, etc., that industry has to develop after their apprentices take their field experience and then help them develop more professional acumen. And things like an Alberta Job Grant, when 85% of the industry is small business, they don't have a training budget. And so this is coming off their bottom line. So that money went away and still hasn't been replaced. And then the apprenticeship incentive grant and completion grants just disappeared quietly. And these are significant incentives to hire. And then also when an apprentice is having to take time away from hours on the site to do their apprenticeship, they're having to deal with, can I afford to? Can I afford to lose my pay? Will my EI replace it? And if my incentive for completion has gone away, these were all the financial balancing acts that people would be going through. So it is incredibly short-sighted that when workforce has been screamed from the hilltops every 18 seconds for the last 3 years, that 3 very significant and well-established and proven incentives were just pulled away with little fanfare. And frankly, I'm surprised there hasn't been screams of outrage from industry at the loss of that, because it is a difference maker. So promise what you want, fix what I think you screwed up as well, because these have destabilized what was already struggling to keep up, and it's kind of a two steps back. So I think that there needs to be a bit of a spotlight shone on some of these whilst promises are being made.
Thanks, Bill. Let's stay in Calgary. What's the mood right now with members? You're having an event on Friday. We can touch base on that a little later. What's the temperature of the conversations you're having with members, industry, aside from skilled labor and the grants?
Well, I mean, obviously, tariffs and the behavior of owners that think they can pass the tariff risk on to contractors and bids is probably really what's taken up most of the bandwidth. We've got a little bit of a background noise because we also have a municipal election happening this year that's playing out a little bit. So we've got locals beaking off, we've got federal campaigns beaking off, and we've got Trump beacon off, and so it's whichever channel is beaking the loudest. And right now, tariffs are probably dominant in most people's concerns. We have a huge package of schools that the province is in the process of rolling out, and we're seeing some very unrealistic expectations on their part that the industry is just going to suck up the risk. We've got some large projects in Calgary. We have the event center, we have Arts Commons, we have these big anchor projects. And so quite honestly, I think industry is dealing with the big elephant in the room and the bottom line risk of tariffs mostly, and the federal campaign and such is second or third on the list.
Thanks, Bill. Chris, who or what, I like this term, is beaking the loudest in BC? I mean, we have a new provincial government we're just starting to see in action. What are you hearing from members in industry?
Yeah, I think largely the same as what Bill is seeing on the ground. I think the number one concern for everybody is how the tariff situation and the retaliatory tariffs are going to impact and affect the bottom line, and really how that risk is going to cascade down to those who can least afford the risk. We have been hearing that quite steadily. We've been hearing it from senior bureaucrats. They're a little bit uncertain of what to do and how to respond to industry. We've got an owners only forum coming up today, where we've got about 400 public owners that are tuning in to hear updates from a construction lawyer and from LP, myself and our industry practices consultant on how they should be behaving during this time in order to stabilize the industry, in order to send the proper messages to the industry that we can get through this if we're reasonable, and we can get through this if risk is appropriated in the proper fashion. So I think between tariffs and the election, those two things are starting to heat up and dominate the beaking of all contractors across British Columbia. And I will say, and I know LP will lean into this one, but the new CCA campaign, which is Construction for Canadians, was just launched last week, and it is so encouraging to see so many construction associations and so many builders across Canada lean into this campaign and make sure that their voices are going to be heard. So that is something to watch in the coming weeks as we race towards Election Day.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to the Construction for Canadians campaign, but I have one more question for LP. Given we are recording this the day before April 2nd, when the big tariff announcement is coming from south of the border, do you think that this week's going to be tariff focused, the hard focus on that, or what's the feeling?
That's a good question. I think 2 weeks ago, I would have said yes for sure, because that's been the pattern so far, right? Donald Trump, you might like him or not, you might doubt his motive, but what we've seen as a clear pattern is trying to create that chaos and have people in media talk about him. in a circle, right? So February 4th, a lot of tariff discussion, then it just went away. And there was another discussion domestically in the US. Then March 4th was all about the tariff again for a few days, a week, and then it just went away. And now we're going to talk about Greenland or Panama or Ukraine, right? I think there's a political sense there to bring back these issues once in a while to create some drama around it. I don't think it will be different this time around. I think the idea would be a week and a half, 2 weeks of very intense tariff talk and then probably some backtrack and resolution. However, I'll point out to what happened last week, which a lot of Canadians was left wondering when Mark Carney and Donald Trump spoke on the phone, which resulted in a Truth Social post from the president that was surprisingly positive for Canada, totally off message. We don't know what kind of picture Mark Carney got of Donald Trump there, but first of all, the first time in quite some time that the president of the United States addressed the prime minister by his actual title and not Governor Trudeau, in that case, Carney, in a very positive message to say that we're looking forward to work with them and create, great business condition and political condition. Now, there's political views on both sides of the spectrum in Canada. Does that mean that Trump prefer Mark Carney in power because they feel like they'll have more control? Or is it more the relationship that Carney has as a former governor of two central bank and very close relationship in New York, where Donald Trump is from, that could leverage that benefit as well? Remember, whether it is Goldman Sachs or with Brookfield, there's a lot of connection in the New York circle that I'm sure Donald Trump are aware of. So interesting dynamic. The reason I bring it up is to answer your question. What is going to happen April the 2nd? Probably when people listen to this episode, they'll know, but we don't. I think it's fair to assume there will be a number of strong announcements, but we might see less of an aggressive position toward Canada if last week language persists. So I'll say, talk to you in a couple of days. We'll see where we're at, but it's going to be interesting to follow.
Bill, did you want...
One more thing, if you
go ahead.
If you allow me just quickly. Actually, go to bed with the tariff. I'll come back to
Bill,
so much.
Did you want to weigh in on the tariff conversation?
Well, no, I mean, I do think that there's theater involved. I mean, that's the world we live in. There's bullying, there's theater. Some people have called it economic terrorism. Whatever headline will grab the public's, attention. It's like, but I've said from the very beginning, dust down your COVID supply chain crisis manual down, all the lessons learned there. It's you got to stay tuned. You're changing your opinion every 6 hours because something else comes out or some other piece of news. It's very uncertain, very agile. The one thing that I will say about Alberta and Calgary that perhaps gives us a little bit of preconditioning for this is for the last 40 years, we've lived the boom and bust cycles of a commodity-based economy. And so the industry here and construction is a barometer of the economy. Whatever's happening is very often reflected in our world. But our industry has stepped up and pulled back to meet cycles, several times over the last 40 years, and that builds up a little bit of a battle resilience that perhaps is leading to a different way that we address this, in that head on, deal with it day to day, pay attention, make sure your sources are reliable. And on the tariffs, it's just another risk added to all the other risk that owners have been dumping on our industry progressively more and more over the last decade. So we're kind of preconditioned for this, and unfortunately it seems to keep heading the wrong way. But one of the good things is it's keeping conversations alive between us and our provincial government, especially as to how do we partner better to build a better Alberta. And I'd like to think that what LP and CCA are doing is going to replicate that same conversation. This is about building a better Canada. And there's not an aspect of civilized life that you do not depend on construction in some capacity every waking and sleeping hour of the day. And the more that message is driven home to politicians, whom I think tend to take our industry for granted, tend to assume it's just a service industry, so desperate for work will take work at any cost. I think this is a huge opportunity for us to speak loud during the campaign and keep the volume up afterwards, no matter what the result, because our industry is the backbone of Canada. It is the only way Canada will grow. It's the only way our infrastructure deficit can be reversed. And it needs to be seen as a fundamental component of Canadian society. And I really think we're beginning to earn that visibility.
Chris, did you want to? We always say
Well,
in BC, it all starts here in the built environment. So,
yeah, I will just say, very well said, Bill, in terms of, keep ourselves embedded into that conversation during and after the election is where we need to be, and I think what we've been building towards, pun intended. To your the discussion about the resiliency of Alberta in terms of weathering the boom and busts. BC's a little bit different, and I think it's just important to note that probably since 2008, we've been on a pretty significant upswing. So we need to pay attention to the micro lessons that we've endured recently, and I would say through the supply chain issues that the COVID challenge brought on. I would say also from some policy decisions that the provincial government made with mandatory paid sick leave that still are reverberating throughout the day, where there wasn't a lot of consultation or thought being put towards our industry about what those ramifications would be. And now with these tariff threats, these are all kind of these bellwether moments that they haven't broken us, but we don't have that boom and bust cycle that you've described. We've got these significant speed warbles that have affected us dramatically in BC. But I think that whatever's going to happen in the next number of weeks and number of months, we have to do what we can to both prepare our owners to behave in a certain way and our contractors to prepare in a certain way, because we haven't seen a worst case scenario situation in British Columbia. And quite frankly, we've got some work to do here to prepare our industry to be as resilient as it may need to be.
Thanks, Chris. LP, circling back.
I appreciate that. Craig, if you allow me to put a bit of conclusion remark on that question on industry priorities, I'd like to pivot back, all the way back to the numbers we've started with, the polling numbers. The harsh reality in Canada is that Quebec and Ontario together accounts for 200 seats now with the new map. This is far more than you need to form a majority. So even with 60, 65% of these seats in some situation for specific parties, you don't need a whole lot of support elsewhere. You do need to run a national campaign, care about every province. You can't win a majority government without some presence in every region. But you really see now in policy announcements of many parties that their approach is very regional. They know where they can win seats. They will go after the swing riding and try to make the best of it. This is why I think as an industry, we need to be very clear that we are unified together as one nation, as one integrated industry of 1.6 million worker. And just last week, I was in Atlantic Canada and I spent some time here in Ontario as well. And seeing the difference from region to region is quite impressive. I'm glad Chris and Bill both brought the question of infrastructure, the question of workforce, and also that question of risk, right, which we tend to put under procurement issues at large. I think those are really the three main thread that we've been working on for well over a decade in construction, where we need to do better. And I'm glad you both brought in the question of risk and relationship with owner, because this is not a sexy political issue. It's not what Mark Carney is going to campaign on. They're going to talk about reducing tax burden and red tape, but fundamentally, we need to have an honest discussion with our owners as an industry. They are our closest friend. They are our clients. But we need to make sure they understand our reality and the challenge we're facing. When we talk about tariff, when we talk about the U.S. relation, when we talk about the change of government that's most likely coming up soon, we need to be realistic that this is significant uncertainty and by extension, additional risk placed on the back of contractor. And risk, at the end of the day, is just a commodity. There's a whole industry that created itself to manage risk. It's called the banking sector. There's a lot of money to make with this, but a contractor is not necessarily the right person to manage that risk. There's a lot of good practices in Canada and abroad that we can look at to make sure that owners, public and private, as well as the construction sector, can work together to find who's the best owner of that risk so that we don't pay more at the end of the day and taxpayer gets stuck with the bill.
Thank you.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
just if I can jump in there, contractors are monetizing risk in ways today that they weren't even 5 years ago. They have no choice. Their banks are telling them either you manage your risk better or we'll do it for you. But owners don't seem to be seeing that. Their procurement departments seem to think everything's there to be commoditized, including knowledge, including skill. And there's always somebody crazy enough out there to take the gamble. And there's a scenario that played out here in Calgary about a month and a half ago, a provincial project that was bid out with full tariff risk put firmly on the laps of the contractors. They only ended up getting 3 bids. So that's the first thing that happens. You get less bids, which means there's less competitiveness. The high number was 78 million, which carried $8 million for tariff risk that they had calculated the full risk. So it's about 10%. The second bid was 74 million. So they obviously gambled on a 50-50 chance. And somebody came in at $70 million. So that project was awarded. And now you have somebody who bought into a project with massive risk. Well, guess who's going to pay that risk? It's going to be the trade contractors and the suppliers and the folks further down the food chain. That is not a win for Alberta taxpayers.
No.
But unfortunately, it is possibly seen as a win for Alberta procurement because, look, we saved the taxpayer $8 million. No, not if a bunch of people go out of business. And this is the message that government and procurement departments need to realize. Risk is like nuclear waste. It doesn't go away. And the further you bury it and the further it is from where you can see it, the more onerous its impact could become when it finally backfires. Risk should be identified. The proper risk holder should also be identified. It should be kept where you can see it and transparently allocated and shared. And that is another message that will need to resonate for a long time yet because it's been going the other way for too long.
Yep. Thank you, Bill. I'm going to switch gears here and talk about the construction for Canadians. I wanted to circle back to that. LP, I did have a chance to check it out last week. It is so informative. It is engaging. Really looking forward to the next month or so with it. So do you want to break down what that is for Canadians?
For sure. I'm glad you liked it.
I did like it.
I think the industry reacted very positively in the last few days. So to summarize what we're doing, what's been happening, last Thursday we launched our national campaign at the CCA in partnership with all of our local, provincial, regional association across Canada. There's 57 of them. We call it Construction for Canadians, and you can find that very easily on your preferred web browser. The URL is construction4cdns.ca. We're on all social media as well. The whole idea of the campaign is quite simple, but very effective in my opinion. We bring together the core consensus for construction. We want to build more and want to build more effectively. And how do we do this? With better investment, with better workforce, and with better procurement. And then what we've been doing is reaching out to campaign and getting them engaged to say why they care about construction, instead of us trying to lobby parties to say you should care. The best example of that is a full component of the campaign has been to reach out to every single nominated candidate in Canada from all the parties, that's several hundred, over 1,000 people, and say, can you send us a selfie video of yourself saying why you care about construction in your writing, in your party, with your values? And we receive already countless video from Conservative, Liberal, NDP saying, I care, and just filming themselves in front of a construction site in their own writing. So this is very powerful for them. They get it on their own social media. They carry the message of construction, and then we get it on our website, on our platform to distribute as well. So it's a win-win scenario. It's a nonpartisan campaign entirely. We really believe that the right place for CCA and for the industry is to be nonpartisan and support the issues that matter to Canadian and contractor. And that's what we've been doing for just a few days now. We are right now on week 2 of the election. We'll have a new advocacy toolkit getting out on Tuesday, and we can expect some media coverage again throughout the entire week.
One component of that, and I've done my fair share of, we were talking about this in episode 1 of door knocking. It's my favorite thing to do if working on a political campaign. And there is some great advice on there for what people to say, because it is your one chance whether it be the politician or some of his campaign team that comes to your door and you have that face-to-face interaction. So Bill, I want to ask for listeners in Calgary, particularly in Alberta, what advice would you give for voters when candidates come knocking on their door? What should they be asking?
Well, I think to one of the points that LP mentioned, they should be asking about infrastructure. The unsexy, there's no ribbon cutting, there's no glory, it gets kicked down to another election cycle. We lived through a water main break, a high profile, significantly disruptive water main break. Calgarians need to make sure their memory doesn't let that one go. They need to push more for infrastructure, for aging infrastructure, for new infrastructure, and ask candidates to talk about what's your commitment to that non-sexy, that non-ribbon cutting, sometimes unpopular work, because even taxpayers complain about stuff that they can't see. But as we've learned, Calgarians complain about most of the stuff they can see as well, because if they don't like it, they complain about it. But I actually think, workforce is almost doing its own job. Their eyes are going to glaze over if you talk to them about risk. But infrastructure should be a huge subject. I need to know my water main I need redundancy built in so that if we get a water main fail, it's not completely shutting off, 700,000 to 1.2 million people. I do think regular Canadians and regular Calgarians need to swat up a little bit on what infrastructure means and start demanding it, because future schools, we've got Kelowna, apparently Chris in your region saying that they have to put a moratorium on development because they're not sure they have enough electrical capacity. We need more housing, but we don't have electrical capacity. Governments need to realize that they can't kick infrastructure can down the road, and that they need to invest. And quite frankly, they need to divorce infrastructure strategy from election cycles so that it is a continuous preventative cycle.
I would say, it's the things that hit at home, the everyday life, like the water main, not having water for, what was that, 6 weeks? Don't forget these things. And those are the type of questions for sure you can hit home with the candidates. Chris.
Yeah, along that same line, I think the long-term infrastructure investment, divorcing the election cycle of announcements and infrastructure investments to one of long-term planning. It's something that we've emphasized here, and I know other parts of the country and nationally we're advocating for that. I do think candidates coming to the door should also expect to get questions about multi-unit residential and affordable housing en masse. If we're seeing this as being part of every platform, but there also needs to be that correlation between infrastructure investment and the plan to build affordable housing en masse in Canada as well, and in communities throughout the country. I do think that there is the need to also put pressure on skilled trades investment, and whether that's modernizing our post-secondary educations to be more adaptable to an industry-led solution on how workforce can be trained in our industry or should be trained. I think we need to move past some of the conventional norms that I would say the population maybe has outstripped in terms of the way our institutions are being utilized for the training of our workforce. And I think industry needs to be involved in some of those next generation solutions for workforce training and preparedness to work in our industry. And I think finally, this goes back to honoring the construction industry itself. And maybe it's not about procurement or about risk, but because I agree, that might make their eyes glaze over, and it might not be within the the vocabulary or the understanding of an average British Columbian whose house they're coming to knock on. But I do think that they need to value the businesses who are building the province and this country. And when we've been saying that people aren't being paid on time, or they're assuming too much risk to be at the bottom of the construction pyramid, what are they planning to do about it? And whether that's harmonizing a prompt payment regime for all of Canada, so we're not a patchwork quilt when it comes to payment certainty across Canada, or when it comes to procurement deficiencies and offloading risk to those who can least afford it. I do think that there is a vested interest in having a vibrant, resilient, and robust construction sector that should be recognized and honored in the communities where people whose doors are being knocked on are seeing trucks in their neighborhood that are essential to that community existence and support and sponsorship, quite frankly.
Thank you, Chris. LP?
At the end of the day, I think it comes down to making sure we democratize the right issues, right? You're entirely right. Procurement risk, prompt payment, security clearance, average Canadian don't really know or care about this. They care about what it means, but they don't necessarily know the connection between the project and the issue we've had getting there. And I think even for infrastructure, there's something to say in terms of democratizing it and making sure Canadian can relate. I think Roger Albert last week on the first episode was saying, people don't want infrastructure. They want a good modern school for their kids to attend. They want a good and safe hospital where they can get medical treatment. They don't always correlate that with infrastructure investment, but at the end of the day, that's what it is, right? You want better school. You want better park in your neighborhood. You want better sewage and water main system, like we've seen in Calgary. And by the way, Calgary is no exception there. They are the one that had a water main leak, but Toronto, Montreal, most large cities are struggling with their water infrastructure. What you see in Kelowna with the power grid, we see in many other regions with a incapacity to expand their water supply, and the issue with modernizing their own water filtration plant and then having moratorium on housing. So really it's coming down to what does the average Canadian cares about and how we make sure that they understand how we can get there as a nation. And I think, as we mentioned earlier, both parties right now understand this and have been heavily pushing in this direction. But when we say we need a long-term planning, we need to depoliticize, that might be a bit of a wishful thinking, but I think we deserve to be wishful here. And we can be happy to see that the NIA is progressing in Ottawa, the National Infrastructure Assessment. We now have the Canadian Infrastructure Council, the CIC, in place to make that non-political assessment. Political will always be involved. There will always be a benefit for a politician to say, I'm going to build a bridge in my riding. But we can do this better, and we can do it based on fact rather than political language.
And we did talk about this on episode 1 LP, as well as do your research. You have the time is now to research each party, what their campaign platform is to date. Roger Alberta said, bring a friend to the vote, bring a friend to the voting polls, get engaged. I always say to my friends, the amount of time you spend scrolling on Netflix, you should take that time to research your political party. So we are going to wrap up things here. Any final remarks? We'll start with you, Bill.
No, I think one of the messages that we've been stressing and what CCA has done with their platform really helps is now is not a time to be disengaged and be apathetic because you're fed up and frustrated. Yes, you're justified in your frustration, but you cannot afford to be disengaged and you cannot afford to be uninformed. And the only way to be informed is to find sources that are less tainted and use what they can teach and share to help you be a better filter for all the other noise that's coming at you. And our industry needs to remember that our importance to Canadians is something we need to bark about. We tend to be this humble, hardworking, too proud to raise our hand and take credit industry. we've been that way for too long. We're not a service industry. We're a fundamental economic structural element of a successful and robust and resilient Canada. And our industry needs to be willing to bark a little bit. And I think I'm so happy to see what Canadian Association is doing, because it's putting a bit of bark out there, and then we at the local level need to be the bite. It is time to refuse to lie down and be a doormat, and refuse to lie down and be taken for granted. And in the eyes of the public, we need to be proud of the careers we offer young Canadians, and we need to help them see why we're proud. We're not just proud because we need workers. We're proud because we drive by the physical assets that we get to build, that we've been a part of, and we get to see communities and our cities grow because of the hard work of our industry and our members. And I really think this is a rebranding of an industry that has allowed itself to fall off the radar a little bit too much. And I'm happy that after 44 years in the industry, I happen to be in this position where I get to be that champion and go out there, and maybe I can say things to some of the stakeholders that some of our members are scared to say. They're worried about a bit of backlash or whatever. I'm not. And I think we're learning a new song sheet, and I think it's one we sing off loud. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Bill. Chris, any final remarks?
Yeah, I think from the outset, we talked a lot about what the polling numbers were showing and what the sentiment is across the country. And I think if there's one word to describe, the situation that Canadians are in right now, is that this election is consequential, and that this isn't a time to sit on the sidelines or to check out because it feels like the same old. It isn't. And it isn't because of the way that Canada seems to be being a bit targeted by our neighbors south, but also because of some of the uncertainty that we've seen even within our own political structures of late. So this is an election of consequence. I am hopeful that there will be more engagement for this election, for whatever compels people to get to the to the voting booths as election day draws near. But one thing that I will say is that this election and this run up to the election is absolutely a critical opportunity for construction to assert its essential role into every community, every region, every economy, and every province. And you roll that up, and we've got a nation of builders that should be represented, reflected, and should be out voting on election day. So I think through our collective efforts, we need to continue to let our membership, let our industry know that they are represented, that there is an incredible group of associations across this country that are proud of the work that they do, and we have their backs. And whether we're talking about prompt payment or risk or procurement or infrastructure or housing, you name it, we can speak to it, and we are advocating on behalf of those builders. But we can't vote for them. So those individuals need to permit themselves to let us do that heavy lifting, but they're doing the hard work in behind the scenes, and all that we ask of them is to make sure that they cast a vote. And I would say to the government parties that are running in this election, continue to engage with construction. We are vital to your success, whether it be in the election or whether it be post-election, for your housing needs, your infrastructure needs, your climate needs, essentially for building Canada's future. So in this run-up, we have something for everyone. We have something for those we represent. And just something that Bill said made me think about, Bill's been in the construction industry for over 40 years. I've been in the association world for a long time, and we've often said in the association world that we do good work quietly. And I think that reflects on the construction industry too. For many, many generations, construction has been taken for granted, and it's just been in the background doing its thing, building structures, building legacy. but not really thrust into the limelight of being an essential partner for the politicians who are benefiting from the efforts, or the public owners who are benefiting from the efforts of a vast construction community in this nation. So doing good work quietly works some of the time, but getting out there and standing up and taking credit and being an active partner is going to be, I think, what really defines this election of consequence in our terms.
Thank you, Chris. LP, any final remarks?
Yeah, I'll end on the sales pitch, I think. Again, to remind people of this campaign, Construction for Canadian, we're really happy to have Chris from BCCA and Bill from Calgary, as well as all of our association partners from across Canada, be part of that movement. And that's really the message I want to leave with you. If you are one of these 1.6 million Canadian working in construction, if your partner or your kid or your parents or your cousin is part of construction and you care about them and you care about these issues, just go see our website. Go visit Construction for Canadian, look it up on social media, look up the news coverage we've received, and make your mind for yourself. Does that resonate to you? Do you want to get moving and building in Canada? And if so, just add your voice to the campaign. Just help us share the message, make sure that we're heard. The campaign is still young. We have 4 more weeks of that election going. We have a significant opportunity in front of us to have an impact on this election and on Canadians. So let's get together, visit constructionforcanadian.ca.
Yes, do your research. So before we wrap up, I wanted to share a few key dates in the federal election. Advanced polls open April 18th. So that's about 3 weeks from now, April 18th to the 21st. And then April 22nd is the deadline to apply to vote by mail or special ballot. And of course, the big day, April 28th, is election day. Voting hours, of course, vary from across the country. And just a quick note, we will be having a live streaming podcast, The Builder's Bench, on the 29th, breaking down the election and reaction and all that good information. So thank you all so much for joining today. It was a great conversation. Episode 3 will be coming at you next week as well.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, Craig.
Thank you all.